Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the Muscle Intelligence Podcast. I'm your host, Ben Pakulski. Today, we're talking to Dr. Scott Sherr, worldwide expert on hyperbaric oxygen therapy and mitochondrial optimization. Scott is one of the owners and founders of Health Optimization Medicine. He's been the worldwide authority on hyperbarics for a very, very long time, healing people's body from the inside, whether it be from just general damage of life or injuries. We get into the mitochondrial impact of healing. We get into the mitochondrial impact of energy optimization. For those of you that don't understand what mitochondrial are, they're ultimately the key to unlocking optimized energy, healing, and recovery. We get into some of his favorite biohacks, some of his favorite protocols for hyperbaric oxygen, and so much more. Dr. Scott is my number one resource when it comes to hyperbarics for sure, and now becoming an incredible resource for the entire world when it comes to optimizing the internal function of your body. Dr. Scott's been a longtime friend. He's been an influence on my life and an influence on the lives of so many other people. You're going to love this conversation with Dr. Scott Sherr. Scott Sherr, man. It's been way too long, buddy. I'm excited to welcome you back and hear all of the amazing journeys that you've been on.
It's good to be back with you, Ben. It's been a long time. I think last time I saw you was at your gym in Tampa when we recorded. It must have been it was before the pandemic for sure, like 2017, 2018. So it's good to see you. And I know that it's remote, but I'll take it.
Yeah, man. Your life has changed a lot since we last spoke, and I get to watch from afar, and my life is continually changing a lot. And just before recording, we were talking a little bit about some personal life experiences. And one of the things that's, I think, close to both of us, sort of near and dear to both of our hearts, is trauma, right? It's like, we're talking about Rick Doblin's idea of living in a world without trauma. And I think we both were like, nope, not possible. And I was like, we got to record on this. So tell me your thoughts, because it's such an interesting space. For you and for me and for probably every listener. What are your thoughts on trauma and why you said, no, it's not going to happen?
Well, I mean, I love the idea. I mean, it's like any sort of big, high goal, right? Like they talk about no trauma in 2070 or like no more murder or no more death. I mean, these are just things that are kind of natural to the human species, right? And so these are things that are going to happen. But the idea itself is more important than the actual goal, I think, in the sense that what Rick was trying to do here was talk about how specifically MDMA therapy can help people process trauma so much easier compared to dealing with trauma and or not having the ability to address it, especially quickly, and then having long-term detrimental effects with PTSD. And of course, the big thing that I see in clinical practice all the time, Ben, is this sympathetic activation. It's this fight or flight overdrive where people get exposed to trauma, and it may not be as severe as somebody dying or somebody with significant injury. It could be something small little things that kind of build up over time, those like little T kinds of things that people talk about, little T versus big T trauma and all that thing. But regardless of what it is, you get to this point where you have this sympathetic overdrive where your body is just kind of stuck in fight or flight. And if you're stuck in fight or flight, you can't heal, you can't detox, you can't sleep, you're anxious all the time, you're depressed all the time. There's neurotransmitter pathways that are very well documented that are going on here, something around the GABA system specifically. GABA is our primary inhibitory, relaxing neurotransmitter, and it's the brakes of our brain. And if that's not working well, then everything else is dominant on side of it because you can't balance it with that GABA side. So the idea that we're not going to have trauma is not possible. But the goal of understanding how to address it and also to acknowledge that it does happen for many of us that prevents us from healing, I think those are the most important things that come out of that kind of conversation.
You know what comes to mind as you say that? So I have a niece who's about to turn 9, but I remember her going back, when she was 2 and 3, and she would experience these, what we'll call traumas. And it could be something as simple as like someone taking her toy away, right? Or her dropping her chicken on the floor. And she would get into these catatonic states where she was literally a rock. And I would like try to hold her and nurture her. It would make her worse. I'm observing this and going, this is going to live in her nervous system forever. She's going to have no idea why. And she's going to have these like sympathetic generalizations of something's going to happen. She's just going to embody that. I'm like, when I saw that, that's why when you said, hey, McDoblin's mission of no trauma by 2070, I don't think it's possible, man. Like watching a little beautiful little angel like her just like lose it over literally, I think it was like someone took her toy away or chicken on the floor or something like seemingly inconsequential to you and me as grown-ups. To her, it was the biggest thing in the world. But you can't tell that little angel, like, you can't be traumatized. And even like, my first thing is, well, I want to nurture her. I want to hold her. She got worse. And I was like, well, how do I tell a little human, like, hey, I've got to calm your sympathetic nervous system. I'm like, we've got to move your body and go dance and move through this. She's like having none of it, and you're like, huh. So like we talk about the conscious override of the subconscious. Adults like, oh, you can undo that. And I'm like, I don't know, man. Like, and looking at her genetics, I've been diving a lot into genetics. So she's got low COMT function, elevated adrenal spikes,
right?
Like acute spikes, and then elevated chronic baseline. So you're like,
right?
Genetically, she's got the hand of a worrier, a panicker,
big challenge.
Yeah. And so surprisingly, a large number of people have that genotype or expression. So yeah, man, I don't know, man. I don't know how we would overcome that in such a young little person.
Well, I think you make a really good point here, Ben, and it's one that I give a lot now, or I make a lot, is that there's a lot of people out there that say, all you need to do is like deal with your trauma and everything else is going to get better. Like if you had a severe issue when you were a kid, or maybe a young adult, maybe you were unfortunately like raped or abused or something like that, and like that could be very big, right? And that could keep you in sympathetic dominance and not feel safe. And that is a very important piece to address. But the additional pieces are what you're kind of driving at here, which is the biochemical, genetic, metabolomic, what I would call like the cellular architecture of what's happening. And then, so what is coming first? It's a chicken before the egg sometimes, in some cases, maybe in your niece's case here, where they have some genetic predispositions, they have some toxic load, they have some aspects of that sort of building up in the system. They reach some sort of threshold, and then their sympathetic system kind of goes crazy, right? And then they don't have ability to kind of calm that down without addressing the physiology of it, right? So what I think is important, I've talked to a number of my practitioners about this, my friends, because there's such a huge emphasis on trauma now, and I think it's good. And I think people like Rick Doblin talking about this is important too, and use of psychedelics can be very helpful here, but it's not the only part of the equation. Almost always, if you have a sympathetic overdrive piece of it, you're also going to have a mitochondrial dysfunction piece, at the very least, right? Where the mitochondria are the part of your cell that are not making energy well, or they are making energy well. We have thousands of mitochondria in some of our cells, like our sperm and eggs and brain have thousands of mitochondria per cell to help us make energy. And we have other cells in our body that don't have as much. But if the mitochondria aren't working very well, if you're not making energy effectively, no matter how much trauma work you do, you're not going to be able to see the benefits that you're looking to really see. And so it really does require both. It requires a focus on the cellular architecture, cellular medicine, focusing on the gut, focusing on the cells, how well you make energy, how well you detox, brain chemistry, hormones, while at the same time looking at the trauma piece together, because it's this spiral, man, like where you get this like sympathetic overload, mitochondrial dysfunction, hormone dysregulation, neurotransmitter dysregulation, and then the body tries to compensate for that by shoving out more of the things that are actually causing more of the problem, and then you just kind of go down this spiral. And sometimes this happens when you're super young, right? But it can happen in any direction. It can start with the sympathetic overload because of trauma. It can start because of mitochondrial dysfunction because of genetic predispositions, like you were talking about. But either way, that spiral just keeps going and going. And so how do you break that? You break it by addressing it on both ends, both on the sympathetic activation end as much as you can, and then you address it on the mitochondrial cellular side as well at the same time. And that's really what I found to be the most effective way to address this kind of thing.
So I don't want to assume that the listener has any idea what sympathetic dominance, sympathetic drive is. Can you break that down for me?
Yeah, so you have what's called your autonomic nervous system, which is broken up so it's part of your nervous system. It's broken up into two parts, one called the sympathetic nervous system and one called the parasympathetic nervous system. Your sympathetic nervous system is your fight and flight or flight nervous system, which is the one that gets activated when you are under a stressful situation. If you are getting chased by a lion, you want your sympathetic nervous system activated. If you're trying to save somebody that's trapped underneath a car and you suddenly have superhuman strength, except maybe, Ben, you could do this without superhuman strength because you can, but most of us would need superhuman strength to lift up the car. That's your sympathetic nervous system, okay? So your parasympathetic nervous system is your rest, digest, detoxify, and heal nervous system. And ideally, this is a yin-yang kind of situation, okay? Your yang side of that is your sympathetic nervous system. Your yin is your parasympathetic nervous system. And you're always supposed to be oscillating between these two, but spending most of your time in parasympathetic mode. However, most of us in modern culture these days spend most of our time in this sympathetic world because we have these chronic stressors. We don't have these acute stressors like we're being run, you're getting chased after by a lion. We're getting these chronic stressors like chronic stress because of work and deadlines and things that they need to do and family and relationships. So these little chronic stressors build up over time and cause chronic stress, which starts depleting all of those other aspects of our biology that I was talking about before. So our sympathetic nervous system and parasympathetic are always trying to balance. It's not like there's a dynamic balance here. And what I mean by that is like, we shouldn't always be in parasympathetic. We shouldn't always be in sympathetic. We should be able to go to sympathetic, but then as soon as we're done with being in sympathetic, we should be able to come down back to parasympathetic. And, for exercise, actually, this is a really big deal, right? Because we know that when you exercise, you don't make your gains when you're lifting. You make your gains when you recover from lifting, when you turn into parasympathetic mode. That's when your insulin level goes up, your GABA levels go up. And these are hormone, and this is where your growth hormone goes up. These are when you actually become anabolic, right? So exercise itself is catabolic. It actually breaks down muscle, where parasympathetic is more anabolic, where you're actually built. And so that's the best way to think about it.
Yeah. So where I'm going as you speak through that is I'm curious how you personally experience in this world and how it influences your sympathetic drive. Like, I think personal experiences and tying it back to, I've got tons of personal experiences on how I manage the overall sympathetic burden, the sympathetic load in my life. But I'm curious what you like personally.
Yeah.
Like we're all experiencing stress. Like, hey, when shit starts to hit the fan, what's going on in your mind? How do you make yourself aware of the fact that like, hey, this is just the sympathetic nervous system giving me a signal? And what do you start to do to overcome it?
I think personally for me, it's been a journey, and as everybody's likely has been. And for most guys that will actually relate to this, I had no clue initially at all. I had no clue when I was in sympathetic versus parasympathetic. And it's taken time to understand the difference, understand what it feels like to truly relax. And once you start getting a feel for what it feels like to feel fully relaxed in parasympathetic, that's when you can get back there. But the challenge is to know what that is. And so in the beginning, for me, it was trying to start meditating and not really knowing what that was, like where the there was, But then with the different experiences over time in different communities in different locations with people that were, very good at meditating and understanding the world of psychedelics a little bit more, personally and professionally, it became more understanding to me that there was a there. Like we talk about with meditation, that there is no there, but there kind of is for parasympathetic activation. Okay. Sure. And so once you understand where that is, then you find ways to get there. And there are easy ways and there are more difficult ways depending on everybody, depending on the person. For me, I know that an easy way is I have compounds that I can use that can downregulate my nervous system that work on the GABA system, right? So I have things that work on GABA in more comprehensive ways that can do it within about 15 minutes. But I can also just extend my exhales, right? And so if I'm breathing, I can just take 5 minutes and just do a breathing pattern where I extend my exhales. And that will calm down my nervous system. I can go outside and just take a slow walk in nature. I have a lake around my house. I can just walk slowly around the lake once in 20 minutes. It's like a complete reset of my nervous system to do that, right? And so what I guess what I emphasize here when people are listening is that I love to meditate. I love my sauna. I love going out in nature. Breathing exercises are great. But I think main sort of focal point to understand is that there is a there. So when you know what it feels like to be parasympathetic, that's how you can get back there.
It's so easy.
And I think that's the best way I describe it, because unfortunately, most of us don't live in a place where we know how to relax anymore, right? We're relaxing by scrolling on our phone or watching the next Netflix documentary, right?
Yeah, it's disconnecting rather than relaxing, right? And so the example that I use is, most people listening to this will know who Conor McGregor is, the UFC fighter. And when he walks to the ring, he's intentionally, obnoxiously swinging his arms. And everyone's like, why does he do that? And you'll know, like he's operationalizing, keeping his brain out of sympathetic dominance by relaxing his muscular system. So if I can keep my arm swing completely relaxed and literally just like swinging my arms, swinging my body, swinging my shoulders, like a little kid walking through the schoolyard, it prevents my brain and my nervous system from going into sympathetic override. So a lot of my guys, I'll teach them to operationalize something like that when they're walking. Yeah. So you can still walk and be in massive amounts of sympathetic dominance. You can walk and be uptight in breathing, uptight muscular system, very focused visual gaze. So my operationalization of this is like, hey, when you're walking, I need you to swing your arms. I need you to swing them like they're just floating. I need you just to completely relax your arms, your shoulders, your face, your neck. And maybe you start swinging obnoxiously like Conor McGregor and you start like, how can you be as loose as possible? And like people are like, oh, okay. And you start to, there's levels to that, right? There's levels to like letting go of that. And when you start to really let it go, you're like, oh, that's what it feels like to let my muscular system go, right? That's what it feels like to let my breathing go. And you're like, yeah. And like you say, now you know what the there feels like. Now I can go in bed. And when I lay in bed at night, I can just go, I can let, and NSDR does this too, right? Non-sleep deep rest. You can sort of like contract and relax and teach the muscular system and the breathing system to go, letting off the armor.
Yeah, I love that. And actually you can do this pre, intra, and post-workout too. And that's the interesting thing. Like you don't have to stay in sympathetic dominance your entire load of exercise. In fact, you will do better if you can oscillate in between. Get yourself to more of a parasympathetic place before you exercise will give you more what we would call sympathetic reserve, which means that you have more capacity to do heavier work if you're not going into an exercise or workout super stressed. And I'm sure you know exactly what I mean here, Ben. Like you just came out, like you just yelled at your kids and you just go to the gym. Like that is, you're not going to have as much power and as much strength as if you were coming from a more relaxed place. And then even in between sets when you're exercising, depending on what kind of exercise you're doing, if you can downregulate your nervous system, you can get more parasympathetic while you're intra-workout, your sets are going to be stronger when you do your sets as you're doing your workout. And so there's breathing techniques you can use, there's posture that you can use, there's other things that you can do to help downregulate that nervous system between sets when you're actually exercising. And then after you're exercising, you can then use various different tactics to get yourself parasympathetic as fast as possible. You can lie down on the ground, put your feet up. Like that's a great one to get really parasympathetic. This is where carbohydrates actually come in too, where carbohydrates post-workout will increase your insulin, increase your GABA levels and calm down your nervous system. And so lots of other things you can do here, but just some examples of where many people don't think about parasympathetic activation. If you can leverage it inside of even a workout, you can see massive benefits. And I'm sure you've seen this firsthand many times.
Yeah. I talk about that a lot. One of the interesting things that I'm doing now, Scott, is I'm working with some pretty awesome guys and what they don't even know they're doing. So the most successful guys in the world are already doing this without recognizing it. They're using things to regulate their nervous system. I watch people move around and I'm like, oh, do you know why you do that? They're like, no. I'm like, well, you do that because you're unconsciously regulating your stress levels. Yep. Like some people use exercise as a compensatory mechanism, right? To compensate for some type of sympathetic arousal or some type of stress. Some people use alcohol, some people use drugs. We're all sort of like these compensating animals. I'm like, I observe people's behaviors. When I start coaching somebody, we do a 16-hour audit. I'm like, just write down what you do. And I can watch patterns of like, hey, at this time I pick up my phone. At this time I go for a walk. And I'm like, well, the reason you pick up your phone is because you're either distracted distracted, or which is very likely, but you're probably experiencing an energy lull, right? You're probably feeling your energy is going down. So like if I pick up my phone, I can get a little bump in energy from dopamine. Or if I'm going for like, I need to eat at this time. Like, do you need to eat, or are you just trying to regulate your autonomic nervous system? So you start looking at how the body lays down these unconscious lifestyle habits that are ultimately regulating their nervous system some way. Most often, like most people are going to pick up their phone right before they get an important meeting. Why do you do that? Or, like, well, because you need energy, or you're trying to get focused, or they'll pick up the phone after they're done an important meeting because you're trying to regulate. And that's a really interesting thing to observe. And I think probably a useful, habit for people to start paying attention to themselves. Like, hey, what am I doing and why? I know myself, if I'm trying to regulate, I'll do things like that unconsciously and like, like now we try to make it conscious. So it's super fun to observe people's behaviors.
Yeah, but to the detriment for most people, unfortunately, right? In the sense that,
of course,
most people, the best athletes and the best people that you're talking about, they do this in a way that actually helps them perform better. But most people are actually doing it in a way to compensate for dysregulation that's ongoing, kind of thing.
Well, they're doing the best they can. I always think like when I teach somebody, I'm trying to give you a new skill. Like everyone's compensating. Sometimes compensation is negative. Sometimes it's positive. Obviously drinking is not going to be as positive as going for a walk or a run, but they're doing the best they can because they're looking for immediacy, right? Depending on the scope of what they're trying to escape. Like, I need to get out of this now. And maybe I don't have the tools. Maybe I'm like, I don't have the knowledge or the tools to get me out of this, which is why we do what we do, right? Like my mother became a compulsive drinker because when she was 14 years old, nobody said, hey, that stress, that adrenaline, that anxiety you experience in perpetuity, if you just go for a walk outside, you're going to feel way better and not reach for the Jack Daniels. You know what I mean?
Right.
But nobody taught her that, right? So if we can be sort of the lighthouse in the storm here for parents out there, for grownups out there to be like, hey, it's all the same thing. We're all, I always say our challenges are common, right? We're all experiencing some type of like anxiety, overwhelm, fear, sympathetic over arousal. And like, well, what's your method or what's your mechanism of getting out of that? And you find people who have positive ones, they generally become more successful, more effective, right? Success is a good measure, but effectiveness. Mm-hmm. And people who have a bad compensatory mechanism sort of slide down the slippery slope.
That's a perfect way to say it. I mean, we are compensating, and if we can create better ways to compensate for those natural tendencies, that's where we can change habit loops and we can change performance, right? So instead of reaching for the alcohol, you reach for a walk in your running shoes, right? That's going to be a huge difference for somebody over the long term. So I think the goal is to keep allow people to be more aware of the cycle that we're all kind of in, right? We all have these habits, and we have these brains that are still Paleolithic, man. Like we don't have brains that are set up for modern society. So like we are sort of stuck in like the fear, guilt, shame, like all the time, right? Because we're always just trying to survive. That's what our egos want, like our ego constructs. And so, but if we can become more aware of those things by creating that space, creating the capacity of awareness and that parasympathetic activation, then that's when things become more evident to us that what's serving us and what is not serving us, and then what alternatives might be to help leverage our biology, because we have the biology, and these are things that we can leverage in positive ways if we know what's going on, and from there we can really make some really big changes.
Man, what you said right there is so brilliant, and I'm just going to like double click on it. It's we have this ancient biology existing in a modern world, and I say to so many people, you're not lazy, but your biology is not keeping up with the demands of your life. So this is why we train, right? This is why we improve our nutrition. This is why we supplement. This is why we keep our body operating at high levels so that our ancient biology can keep up with our modern demands. And like, if people don't recognize that, they're going to constantly feel like my brain is broken, I'm lazy, I'm tired, I'm lacking motivation. Yeah, because you're operating an outdated operating system in a modern technological world that's like way outpacing what your body's used to. So this is when we get into the stuff you're talking about is like, well, what do I do to get my mitochondria to operate the level that's going to allow my biology to keep up with what my demands are? And so it's such a foundational thing. Like, hey, people just don't get it. I think they're not bridging the gap. Like biology, old, science, new, like technology, new, Yeah.
Yeah. And I'm 100% with you on this, because people forget that we have the same brains that we had, 5,000, 10,000, 20,000, 30,000 years ago, right? And a lot has changed since then. And so we always have to keep that in mind as we're living in a very synthetic world now. We have lots of synthetic things around us all the time. Poor lighting, poor food, poor nutritional food, like
poor demands. Well. I think it's the demands, right? Also,
yeah, and our physical demands, right? So the physical demands for humans, like, were huge, right? But then when you had that physical demand, like you had to run and you had to hunt the animal, then you ate it and you relaxed, right? It wasn't like, the constant stress of whatever else that's in our lives now. It's like there was
physical demands are normal, whereas now psychological demands are physical demands are extremely low now, right?
Exactly.
Whereas mental demand is it's shifted.
Exactly. And then we're not used to this constant mental demand. And we know our brains take up 20% of our oxygen capacity. It's a huge amount of energy required. And I remember reading a statistic that these master chess players, they burn like 4,000 or 5,000 calories a day during tournaments, not moving, just in their seat doing these master chess tournaments. So it's a huge caloric need and a huge amount of mitochondria in the cells. And then you pair that with shitty foods and shitty diets and shitty exercise, but like you just don't get the nutrition that you could even 70 or 80 years ago. We know that like plants, for example, and animals as well, but especially plants, have about 70 or 80% less nutrient capacity now than they did in the 1940s and 50s. And so even if you're trying to eat like a quote unquote healthy diet and get all your macros, like the amount of micronutrients that you're getting out of that, especially if you're mostly plant-based at this point, is really, really hard. And so that's where the modern sciences come in, and looking at testing, looking at cellular data, looking at your gut, neurotransmitters, hormones, and using all of this and understanding that in a modern world, we need to be supplementing most of the time. And especially, if you think about it otherwise, like most of us would have been dead by 40 or 5,000 years ago as well. So
even 100 years ago, man, 100 years ago. Yeah.
It's true. Yeah. Very true. Yeah. So sanitation has been a big part of that, but still our biology was not meant to live past 40 or 50 years. This is why women go through menopause. They weren't supposed to live past that time. And so if we want to stay healthy and we want to stay optimized after 40 years of age, we need to be thinking of things more from a data-centric cellular perspective, or we're going to be deteriorating. It's just and I know you're a big proponent of understanding how life changes after 40 and 50 years of age. And these are some of the reasons why.
I've this like theory that I've come up with where once you're no longer able to procreate, the body just starts to decay. So there's like, if you keep your body in a procreating state, the body doesn't decay. So like if the body goes, hey, this guy's no longer procreating, well, what happens? Your cardiovascular system stops working, your penis stops working, your brain starts shriveling up. You're no longer attractive to the opposite sex. You're no longer going to procreate. We don't need you anymore. You're taking up space and resources. Get out.
Yep. Yeah.
So they're like, how do I maintain that young, youthful vigor and the ability to ultimately procreate for as long as I possibly can? If that's ultimately why we're here, there's some beauty or because beauty behind this idea of like nature's just, man, like you're done. You've served your purpose. Now move on. Obviously we want to prevent that, but it seems like a natural decline.
Yeah, I mean, we had to live long enough to see our kids old enough so that they wouldn't die, right? And that's and there always had to be a certain number of people in every village and every tribe that lived longer to be the wise people to pass on whatever it might be, the stories and the oral traditions and things like that. And they also think, interestingly, the homosexual gene has actually been propagated for a similar reason, actually, in some ways, where there's some theories where there is homosexuals always in populations because these are people who didn't get married, didn't have kids, so they could be the caregivers for other people in the community that needed them as well. So it's kind of interesting.
Is that a gene? So what do you know about? I believe. What do you know about that? So
it's more like some people say it's
environmental.
Yeah. Okay. There's more like a genetic predisposition, right? It's not like one gene for being gay or for being homosexual, but there seems to be a genetic predisposition for some people, and there also seems to be just like a population amount that has this propagation. And
do you know one of the theories, what gene it is, or what is it polygenic? No idea. No,
it's not like one single gene. It's more like there's a polygenic kind of thing where there just tends to be more of there tends to be like, I don't remember what the percentage of the population is, but the idea here is that, and one of the theories is that, being homosexual, at least ideally, right? Like, hypothetically, not ideally, hypothetically, you don't pass along any of your genes, right? So what's the evolutionary benefit of being a homosexual, right? There isn't one from a propagation or from a procreation perspective, but there is potentially one for being the person in the village, in the tribe, that was able to take care of other people because they didn't have any other kids to take care of themselves. So to take care of elderly people, take care of sick people. And so there's some ideas, at least from an evolutionary perspective, that's one of the reasons why that the homosexual predisposition, if you want to call it that. I know people will argue about this probably afterwards, but that was one of the reasons why they think that might be the case. But in essence, what I'm kind of driving at here is that to stay optimized, it does take more than just thinking that you're eating healthy and doing things that are healthy for you after the age of 40 for most people. And this is like looking at cellular data, looking at what's happening underneath the hood. I mean, this is, as you know, Ben, why we have our nonprofit, the Health Optimization Medicine in Practice, which was set up to optimize health and look at these foundational biomarkers and things like that. Knowing that, to stay optimal, we don't want to be healthy for a 45-year-old or 50-year-old. We want to be healthy for, as you were kind of talking about, like in prime of our life, which is 21 to 30 years of age overall and ideally. So what we do is we optimize nutrient gut hormone networks to when you're 21 to 30, because that's when you are most optimal. So the goal for most of us as we age is to feel as good as we can for as long as we can and have as much what's called morbidity compression, which means we have as few bad years or months as possible and die as healthy as possible, kind of deal. And so
that's the goal. The curve, right?
Yeah, exactly. So that's the goal, right? But that's not what's happening, right? So women, for example, have a huge amount of morbidity where they live longer, but they have many more years where they have challenges with their health with those extra years that they have, right? So the goal really is, to learn how to do the things we're talking about here to reverse some of those markers and slow down that whole process so that, we have as many healthy years as possible. That's the healthspan piece that I know you and I, care so much about.
Talk to me about that process because, I have a similar thing. We have like what we call a 10-part diagnostic when anyone starts in our ecosystem and we're going through a lot. And like, not everyone needs to do the whole thing. Generally, everyone does at least half. We do either 5 and 5 or full 10. And so we have what's called an internal analysis and external analysis. So internal being everything that's inside of your body, external, everything sort of external body fat, joint by joint, mechanics, muscle mechanics. But like trying to really uncover like what the bottleneck is currently, what the limiters are, so to speak, what the leverages are. But I'd love to hear what you guys what you're currently doing and ultimately what you've changed your mind on, or what's maybe the most cutting edge thing you guys are doing that's new and unique to health optimization medicine.
I mean, I think the key really here is that there's lots of different, as you mentioned, levers. Like there's lots of different ways to kind of start getting in and start making change, right? Some of them can be related to musculoskeletal, some can relate to psychosocial, emotional. The way that the health optimization medicine works is by looking at what's called metabolomic data. So this is data that's something you can actually measure in the cells, looking at real-time workings of how well you can make energy, how well you're detoxing from the energy you make, how optimized your gut is, neurotransmitters, hormones. And the focus is to shift all these nutrient, gut, hormone, neurotransmitter networks to ideal levels, to the levels when you are between 21 and 30 years of age. Because that's when we're most optimized. That's when we're most resilient. That's when we're the highest ability to procreate, to fight, all those kinds of things, fight and fornicate, right? And so the goal with the whole process is to shift all those networks there. And you shift them using vitamins, minerals, nutrients, so supplementation, hormones sometimes, gut optimization. And then you also look at the various other aspects of what we do. So looking at circadian rhythms, so chronobiology, looking at toxic exposures, looking at epigenetics and exercise, of course, being a big part of that. Gut health is a big part, as I mentioned. So a really big focus on mitochondria, so bioenergetics and understanding how we can truly optimize mitochondrial function. And this is obviously diet. This is obviously lifestyle. This is not just giving people supplements and just shifting their networks. It's shifting their whole biology and their lifestyle and their diet to a place where it's going to be most optimized personally for them, right? I think that's the main thing. It's not like it's a cookie cutter approach. But the problem here, Ben, and I know this is kind of where you're going to is that this kind of stuff takes time. It's not like if you're 45 years old and you're feeling the way you are, and maybe it's not well, you can't expect that tomorrow you're going to feel better. Like, it's going to take time. When you're shifting these networks, when you're optimizing hormones and nutrients, and you're optimizing mitochondrial function, this takes time. And it can take 6 months. It can take longer. It depends on how much, how compliant you are on some level too, right? And how much you're going to kind of sign on to dietary change and lifestyle, and dealing with your stress and toxic relationships, toxic people, getting a new bed from your spouse if they snore, for example, or not eating pizza. Like, I had a client of mine that refused to stop eating pizza for a couple of years until he finally did, and he felt so much better. But he's already feeling better from a lot of different other things. But so the real question I always kind of bring into the equation is, how can I help people feel better right now while they're on that longer path? And there's a couple, little things, or kind of, little but big things that I've found over the years, and that what we've kind of gravitated towards as, we've kind of gravitated from a nonprofit to having a for-profit company that makes products as well. But the goal with the company on the for-profit side was to make products that could help people right now while they're on that longer path. And back in 2020, we were the first company to work on it for a particular compound called methylene blue, which I know you know now, and I think you're probably one of the first people that tried it back in the day as well, when we were doing some of the first R&D. And it's a compound that's controversial in some ways, but it's a very safe, very well-tolerated compound used at very low doses, is fantastic for mitochondrial optimization. And so it can help with energy, it can help with detox. And so using a little bit of that has been transformative to my clinical practice, right? Where initially I didn't know how to get people started sometimes, because it was just too hard to make that leap to walking around the block or taking a couple supplements. But then starting a little bit of methylene blue has gone a long way to help that. And so that's one major thing that I've found. And the other one is leveraging that GABAergic system as well, leveraging the system by putting the brakes back on, so you can take people out of that sympathetic overload and do it immediately while they're doing the harder work of maybe dealing and processing trauma, and then working on mitochondrial function. So those are kind of the two major things that I've been really seeing a lot of benefit for recently.
Yeah, I see you spending a lot of time, and hear you spending a lot of time listening to your podcast when I can, like when you're on other people's, and a lot of emphasis on mitochondria, which is awesome. And so it's funny because, it's my history obviously is very much through the body. So I'm always trying to help people access regulation of circadian rhythms, access regulation of GABA, access regulation of the autonomic nervous system. It's just my default. I'm like, oh, this is the way. And it's funny to hear you coming from the science side. Like, no, it's mitochondria and supplements, and everyone sort of got their spin, and I love it, man. That's why I love getting the ability to connect and collab. Are you testing mitochondria? I've heard of some companies lately that apparently are useful, but is there a way for us to test the effectiveness of mitochondria?
So there are some new tests that have come out over the last 3 or 4 years that purport to give you a score on mitochondrial function. The gold standard at this point still is called a punch biopsy. So it's actually taking a biopsy of muscle and looking at it under the microscope and checking mitochondrial function that way. So
what are you looking for at that point? You're
actually looking for electron flow through live mitochondria, and seeing how well they're making energy from there.
Interesting.
But outside of that, which is not what most people want to do, there are these newer tests that have come out over the last 3 or 4 years. I've talked to a lot of my colleagues about these tests. None of us are very emphatic that they're very good yet. There are a couple of new ones that have come out. There's a guy and his name's Chris Masterjohn, that just came out with another one that's purported to be better, but I haven't used it. It's very expensive, about an $800 test. So it's not a cheap endeavor to get this kind of thing done. What I do in clinical practice, Ben, is that we use organic acid testing. So organic acid testing is urine and blood looking at what are called metabolites of energy production. So when I was in medical school, I learned about something called the citric acid or Krebs cycle, which is a cycle of intermediates. Basically, our food, our macros, especially fat and carbohydrates, get broken down into something called pyruvate, and then that goes into your citric acid cycle, which all we're really doing, the major reason why we eat those foods, carbohydrates and fats, is to break them down so that we can use the electrons from that food to make energy. And that energy is, obviously that ATP, that's what we're making, right? And that ATP is our energy currency. But the electron cycle, those intermediates, you can measure all of those. You can measure them using organic acid testing. So you can actually measure those intermediates on the cycle. You can also measure antioxidant levels, and because you need antioxidants to be able to neutralize the mitochondria, the stress from making energy. You can also measure micronutrients. So indirectly, you can get a pretty significant idea of what's happening with mitochondrial function by looking at some of these factors that we typically do using metabolomic testing.
I know you're a nerd like me when it comes to this stuff, man. Are you looking at light frequencies and its influence on mitochondria? Because we know like long wave red light, like sort of far infrared. I'm not the biggest fan of red light. I think it's got utility. I think it's just like everyone's on the bandwagon right now. So I was like,
sure,
how about just go and spend some time in the sun? Like I'm all for red light, man, but it's now become this panacea of cure all for everything. And I think great, like shining it on your balls seems a little outrageous, but
sure,
same like the butthole tanning. I'm sure you've seen the crazy people. I'm like, what are you doing, man? Anyways, I don't know if it works or not, but I just like the idea. I'm curious if you've explored whether it be from a device or from natural exposure to specific frequencies of light or all frequencies of light and the impact of mitochondria.
Yeah, there's a huge science of light and mitochondria. And the best guy here, as you probably know, is Jack Kruse, and talks about how our mitochondria actually produce various spectrums of light.
Right.
And they're also, the mitochondria are more sensitive to various spectrums as well. The red spectrum specifically has a specific impact on what's called complex 4 of the mitochondria. So the mitochondria has something called the electron transport chain, which takes those electrons from our food and spins them around, or basically shuttles them around through these complexes, 1, 2, 3, and 4. And complex 4 is called cytochrome oxidase. And these cytochromes are called cytochromes because they have various sensitivities to light. And so the red light spectrum has a specific photonic capacity. The photon energy actually increases the capacity of this complex to work better. And so you feel better in sunlight, primarily because of red light exposure. And these red light panels can be great in some cases, as long as they're relatively good, is because they are firing up your capacity to make more energy in the mitochondria because of their impact on complex 4. Interestingly enough, it's a synergy with methylene blue, because methylene blue can also donate electrons to the complex 4 directly, so enhancing the capacity for you to make energy. And so that's a nice combination. You take some methylene blue, you go out in the sunlight, or you take some methylene blue, you go on your red light panels, and you can feel the energy rise as a result of that. But there's a lot of energy and light metabolism in the mitochondria that I don't quite understand. But high level, what we are supposed to be doing is be yoked to that big red or yellow ball that's outside, depending on the time of day. It might be red in the sunset kind of thing, but like that big yellow ball is what we are yoked to. Like, we need to see the sun. We need to get it in our eyes. We need to get it on our skin. We know that we have light receptors on our skin too. Like, this is actually a study that was just recently done that looked at light exposure with eyes not getting exposure, but the body getting light exposure. So we have light receptors everywhere, probably on our buttholes too. I guess not that many, probably, because it doesn't see that much sun, but definitely on our skin.
Such a weird thing.
I know. It is, it's all for the socials, man. You know how it goes. But when it comes down to it, is that we all need to be getting more sunlight exposure than we're probably getting. And so sunlight, getting infrared, like in a sauna, getting red light in a red light bed or a red light panel, can be very, very helpful when you're trying to approximate these kinds of things. And so I use it a lot in clinical practice. I think it needs to be used with an understanding of why you're using it. But I do think that when it comes to mitochondrial function, sunlight is essential. And so if you're a sunscreen person, just don't put it on your arms or your legs or something, and go it outside and get it on there if you're worried about wrinkles on your face. I know a lot of people are worried about that too. So I think my sense of it here is that all medicine, Ben, is mitochondrial medicine, really what it comes down to. And so it's cellular medicine because the sort of the lowest and common denominator, and I don't mean by lowest meaning the worst. I think everything comes down to mitochondrial function. That stress sympathetic overload that we talked about, that's all mitochondrial dysfunction in the end. And then you have this pattern you can't break, right? And that's why we talked about having to leverage both the GABA system and mitochondrial support at the same time. But you can get there in different ways, and that's what I love about what your work too, Ben. You can get there by fascial work, by body work, by re-engaging that muscular system, like you were talking about with the fighter, outside of your brain, knowing that by doing that, getting back into your body, your brain is going to now get out of sympathetic more easier, right? And so I work with people that do muscle and fascial work all the time to get out of that sympathetic dominance, right? And so I think that there's so many different ways into this, but in the end, my strong sense is that there needs to be a cellular mitochondrial focus, because if there's only so much you can do otherwise if you don't also focus on that too.
Totally. And I don't do any manual work, and I don't generally even advocate for a lot of manual work for most people. I'm sure it's great, but I'm not like a big like proponent of going to, I'm sure it feels great, awesome. But specifically using movement as sort of your generator, your electron transport generator. Curious what you know about exclusion zone water. I've had Joel Pollack on probably 5 or 6 years ago now. I've got to catch up with that guy again, but I'm curious if there's any newer research, because I know, this easy zone water was sort of perpetuated as being really impactful and really important in keeping that cellular charge, that cellular voltage, which obviously is then going to be correlated to electron transport chain.
Sure.
Curious if you pay attention to that, if that's something you focus on, or if it's like not really on my radar, not a big enough lever.
It's one of the things that I'm one of the most. I listened to him lecture actually in 2016, I want to say, at a bulletproof biohacking conference, and I was blown away. It was there's very few lectures that I remember walking out of going like, "Holy shit, this is so important." And so, but I haven't heard a lot of it recently over the last several years.
He retired from it, I think. He went to do something else.
I did. I heard that too. But I think there is some controversy here, Ben, but it makes so much sense because you have structured water in your cells. You have structured water in your mitochondria. This is also called deuterium depletion water. So if people are listening, they might have heard of deuterium depletion.
Are those the same thing? Are those the same?
It's very similar. Yes, it's very similar. Huh. Yeah. I think that's not. Yeah. So deuterium depletion is structured water. Structured water is third phase water, or fourth phase water, excuse me. As far as I understand, they're very, very similar. And so you make more of this water in your cells, and you make more of this water when you get red light exposure, when you get sunlight exposure. Hyperbaric oxygen therapy, we think, does this actually too, because of the pressure-related changes in there. So I do think that, and you get better flow that way. And that's what he was actually able to show. And so this all comes back down to, you can go deeper, man. Like we can go deeper than mitochondria if you want. Like we can go to like bioenergetics and bioelectrics and photonics.
I'm interested in that stuff. That's how much are you into that?
But the problem is that it's really difficult to quantify that stuff. It's difficult to say, this is what you need from a biophotonic, bioelectric impedance perspective. We just don't know. So the best way we have to test right now is the level of metabolomics, like we're doing now in our health optimization medicine. But from an energetic perspective, that's very much not the base level, as you and I both know, right? But the manifestation of the level that we can actually test and correct and optimize really starts in the mitochondria. These very ancient bacteria that have been around for millions and millions and millions of years, that used to be their own species and then got co-opted by our cells, millions of years ago, right? So for me, and the way I think about it is that you can go down deep into the esoteric, into the non-science, like more into the energy, photonic, bio. But this stuff is much more difficult to talk about and to shift and see objective measures. Where people can see benefit, right? But does everybody need objective measures? No. But I think from like a science perspective, what we try to do is work on that level, knowing that there's much more, underneath that level. Maybe eventually we'll have enough tools or sensitive enough tools to be able to measure this stuff better.
Yeah, and the way that I've come to understand the levels of organization of the body, and feel free to correct me if you think this is incorrect, but so at sort of the base level is our biology, our biological systems. We have our tissues, we have our organs, we have our organ systems. On top of that, we have chemistry, biochemistry, so we have molecules. And then on top of that, we have physics and biophysics, which is vibration and photonics, sort of like you're saying. So like there's this like levels of organization of the human system.
Sure.
And like so many people are focused on biology. A lot of people are talking about chemistry, but like very few people in the world are yet into like the physics and biophysics. And it seems like that's the future. It feels like that's the a really big influence that we certainly haven't tapped into. But as you said, there's not a lot of ways, at least that I know of, certainly that can quantify. So, all of our science zealot friends out there, like, where's the science, bro? They're going to get really pissed off. You start saying, "Hey, this works," but I think you and I have to be those guys who are the reason we are who we are is because we're willing to test the boundaries and willing to sort of put ourselves out there and be like, no, this works. Whether or not you can prove it yet, doesn't really mean that it doesn't work. I think a lot of people have a hard time with that.
It's really hard for people. I mean, you and I are coming from the same place here, right? And I agree with actually your levels, being like the sort of energetic vibratory level, right? Where things are vibrating at sort of Planck scales, right? At all times inside of us. And that we're mostly made of space. We're not made of actual, things that you could actually see. Like the actual physical manifestation of us is like something ridiculous compared to what's space. But still you see us, right? That's what we're here. But we're blinking in and out of existence as well, because that's how physics and all this. So, but again, this is all very difficult to quantify and think about. But
for us, someone out there might be doing this.
Yeah. I mean, but you can look at cosmology, for example. You can look at geometry, sacred geometry, if you want to call it that. But it's just the geometry of the universe and those kinds of things. So these are all very cool and it goes back to things like the hard problem of consciousness, right? Is consciousness, is it inherent or is it something that emerges from matter, right? This is you can get all down deep into that stuff and you and I do this stuff all the time and love it. But when you're talking about how to work with people and, meet them where they are, you meet them at their biology, biochemistry level, because that's where you can make the shifts. But when you're doing that, you're obviously also, having an effect on all those other deeper levels too, of course, right? So it's an interesting place to be if you're in the healing space and you're working in on the alternative space on some level where you're okay with talking about this stuff, but you're also looking to try to quantify it and give it, objective heft, and I think that's kind of the cool space that you and I are in, and in the work that we do.
Yeah. You said, I think you said, does the brain give rise to consciousness? And I was listening to something recently, and probably my stance on it is the consciousness gives rise to the brain.
Yeah,
and so it's an interesting,
question,
it's an interesting exploration of is it actually consciousness that's creating the material manifestation of it all? But we can go down those paths. I'm sure we'll do that in another walk in Berlin someday, Scott. I remember fond memories of the walk in Berlin.
Yeah, that's called the hard problem of consciousness, and it's a big one. But I think most of us in this world that have had experiences as you and I have would mostly be on the side of saying that consciousness is inherent, right? And that matter rises out of consciousness as opposed to consciousness rise out of matter, which is the brain giving you consciousness versus consciousness being inherent and the brain is just a manifestation of that. So, but that's still an argument, right? There's the people on both sides of that. But walks in Berlin one might give you a different perspective depending on the day, the time, and the molecule, right? So,
yes, no comment.
No comment.
All fun times, man. You're still on a regular basis working with patients in a clinical setting?
Yes. Yeah.
Yep. And so is that your primary focus right now, is helping people get well, helping people get strong?
So
whatever
what I do,
version of strong it is?
Totally. Yeah. I have, my practice is multifaceted. The foundation of what I do is health optimization medicine. And that's the nonprofit that we also run called Health Optimization Medicine in Practice, Home Hope for short. And Health Optimization Medicine it's a nonprofit that educates practitioners on how to optimize health. It's a 7-module certification, metabolomics, chronobiology, epigenetics, other kinds of things, sciences that are not taught in medical school. So that's my clinical practice. I do it via telemedicine from my home. And then I also do a lot of hyperbaric consulting still kind of on top of that. And then I help run our companies. So we have Health Optimization Medicine. The for-profit entity is called Transcriptions. And that company is the one that helps patients or help people right now while they're on that longer path. So we have products that are with Methylene Blue that are leveraging the GABA neurotransmitter system. And so I help run that company as educator, operator, all kinds of things associated with it. And I do a lot of educating, especially on some of the compounds like Methylene Blue and the GABAergic things that we have, but all in the context of what we just discussed here, Ben, which is that I think of things as a clinician first, right? And so my clinical practice, the foundation of what I do is focusing on cellular health, mitochondrial health, and then optimizing that. But as I am doing that, I'm also sending them to people like you that are working on movement, or other people that are working on trauma, other people that are working on, other kinds of exercise or body work or whatever. But then adding in supplementation, methylene blue, GABAergic things like, things that enhance the GABA system, and then eventually maybe hyperbaric therapy down the line too, right? So like my clinical practice has just become like the microcosm or the macro sort of ecosystem, I guess, is better for everything that I do, right? So.
Set the record straight for me on methylene blue here, Scott. So if you're the world's expert on this, seriously. So I've used it once in my life when I was with you, and I haven't used it since.
Sure.
I think I just have one. I've never really had a great source on it other than your. I don't have easy access to it. I didn't even realize you guys were like in full production until very recently.
Yeah.
And I don't understand it, and I tend to not do things I don't understand, or at least things I don't convince myself I understand.
I understand.
So tell me about it.
I mean, the short story is it's been around a long time, and it's a shockingly blue color, and it's controversial. But in the end, it's a fantastic compound for mitochondrial function. It really does help at low doses, especially improve the capacity for your cells to make energy more effectively. And the challenge
is acutely, or is it going to have a chronic sort of upside as well?
It can have mostly an effect while you're taking it. And the hope is that long-term that you're optimizing mitochondrial function by doing other things, diet, lifestyle, exercise, supplementation, so that when you stop taking the methylene blue, that you still feel good or even better because your cells have kind of rebounded. There's obviously some crossover there. There is some potential effects where methylene blue might help some of those protein complexes work better over the long term. But in essence, in my practice, the way I typically say it is that if you're pretty sick and need a lot of support, you're going to need more methylene blue initially. And then over time, as you get healthier, we're going to peel it off so you need it less over time. But I mean, the main issue, Ben, here is that 94% of US adults have mitochondrial dysfunction. So they cannot make energy effectively, or they cannot detox or detoxify from the energy that they make. So when we make energy, ATP, our cellular currency, we also make waste products, in quotes. We make carbon dioxide, we make water. We also make reactive oxygen species, which are these free radicals that are normal for us to have, but if our body can't tolerate them, then we don't feel good. We deplete our antioxidants, we feel shitty.
Our body doesn't tolerate them because...
So our body is always naturally making these reactive oxygen species. But what we need to be able to do is only make them in a little bit as signaling molecules, because what our body needs to do is have neutralize them with antioxidants. So if you're depleted in antioxidants because you're overstressed, you're overworked, you're not getting enough rest, you're not getting in that parasympathetic mode, you're going to deplete antioxidants. And then these reactive oxygen species, they build up and they cause significant amounts of stress and inflammation in the mitochondria and in the cells themselves. And so what is happening is that 94% of US adults don't have the capacity to have efficient mitochondrial function. And this is because of parasympathetic downregulation. They have sympathetic overload, as we were talking about before. They have infections, they have insulin resistance, medications can do this, the post-infectious syndrome. So, post-mold, post-Lyme, post-COVID, all these things cause significant mitochondrial stress. And so what methylene blue can do here is it can come into the mitochondria, it can compensate for this mitochondrial stress and make the mitochondria more efficient. It can bypass various areas that aren't working very well. So it can buy you time and give you more support while you're doing the harder work of working on that mitochondrial function over the long term. That's how I typically use it in clinical practice. Now, you can also use it for more kind of as needed for people that are healthier. You can use it as needed for when you're under more stress. So for example, if you're on an airplane, you're all of a sudden pressurized to 8,000 feet above sea level, because that's what happens in a plane. That's a significant amount of hypoxic stress, a low oxygen stress on a plane. And so your body gets very stressed because of that. And so you can use methylene blue to help compensate, because it can act just like oxygen in your cells. And so it can help compensate for that low oxygen state. It also can compensate like on the endurance side too. Like if you're doing lots of endurance, it can increase your aerobic capacity because it can act just like oxygen in your cells too.
Tell me about that. What does that mean? It acts like oxygen? That's interesting.
Yeah. So what oxygen does in the cells is it's what's called the final electron acceptor in your mitochondria, which means that you need oxygen. So remember we talked about those electrons going through. That electron needs a place to go at the end. At the end of that whole cycle in complex 4, it gets picked up by oxygen. Oxygen then makes water with that extra electron, and carbon dioxide and free radicals too, but mostly water. And so if you don't have enough oxygen around, you can't make energy from your mitochondria. So you start making what's called anaerobic respiration. You start making you ferment instead of making ferment energy. Yeah, you make lactate, right? And so this is what people feel when they're on an anaerobic respiration. So if you can maintain people in aerobic for longer, they're going to be able to do more work before they have to stop because of lactate buildup, et cetera, and other things, of course. A good example is I work with a guy that did the Leadville race here in Colorado, which is a 100-mile ultramarathon. And I had him take 36 milligrams of methylene blue every 4 hours, and he cut off his time.
Is that a lot or a little bit?
It's like middle range. I use like 4, 8, 16 milligrams for most people for mitochondrial support. But for somebody like this who was doing like 100 miles, I was giving him 36 milligrams every 4 hours. That's a lot. It's a decent amount. He cut 3 hours off of his time. So 36 milligrams every 4 hours. So,
but like bolus dose?
Yep, bolus dose. Yeah.
Yep, got it.
Yeah, bolus dose. Yeah. And so he did that, and he cut off 3 hours from his time from the previous year. And yeah, not a small amount. We did a couple other things too. It wasn't just the methylene blue, so I'm not going to say the only thing. But
what's the downside? Is it going to make me sketchy like coffee, or like what's the downside?
Yeah, downside of methylene blue are a couple, right? So the number one is purity, man. Like you were talking about this earlier, is that like the problem with a lot of methylene blue on the market is that it's not
a fish bowl cleaner, and you're like,
yeah. I mean, you can get it at a fish tank store. Don't buy that. Don't drink that for you, because it's definitely contaminated lead, cadmium, mercury, and arsenic. But the problem is that even pharmaceutical grade, which is called USP grade, can be contaminated with heavy metals. And the other problem is that like all these companies have come out over the last 6 months or so, and I don't believe any of their certificates of analysis at all, because we've tested them and we know that it doesn't have what it says it has, and has higher amounts of heavy metals than it says it does on the bottle too. And then liquids are really difficult to dose. So I think the first thing about methylene blue is the downside is that you have to be really careful of the quality and where you're getting it from.
Are you detoxifying yourself? Or are you just like sourcing the best stuff?
Yeah, it took us, when we first launched in 2020, it took us a year and a half, about a year longer to launch than we anticipated because of issues with purity. But we found a really good source, and that's one we've been using for the last 5 years. But even that source, we don't just believe the source's, third-party analysis. We do our own, another independent third-party analysis on the product. And we've had to throw away some of it over the years, thousands of dollars, even from a trusted source. And so, so we really go through the ends of the earth to make sure we get good stuff. And we're always looking for the best stuff that we can.
Is it purely synthetic? Is it just a synthetic molecule, or is it naturally occurring somewhere?
So that's the other thing. That's another argument that we get a lot, is that methylene blue is the first fully synthetic drug that was actually made, and it was registered with the FDA back in 1897. And so people don't like that it's fully synthetic, and I get it, but we also live in a non-natural world. We don't live like our Paleolithic ancestors did 5,000, 20,000 years ago. And so we need sometimes synthetic things to help us. And methylene blue is one of these things where, again, I don't think it's for everybody all the time, but I do think it can be very helpful trying to help rebound somebody from a very unnatural state of mitochondrial dysfunction because of the unnatural world that's around them. So, and of course, not everything natural is good for us, as you know, Ben, right? Not everything that comes from the ground, like you can forage for the wrong mushrooms and die. And so, and I've seen this. So it's important to kind of keep that in perspective as a result of, some of that particular argument. But yes, it is a synthetic compound. And as a result of that, there is contamination capacity. And that's why, getting quality stuff is really, really important, and making sure you're looking at their certificates of analysis and going with a company that's been, I think, doing this a long time and doing it well, because there are 4 docs in the team, including me, that are using this stuff in clinical practice. And so those are some of the things that I think about. And the other thing I think about also, Ben, is that is the dosing, because most people are taking too much. Most people need much less than they actually are seeing what they like online and from other people out there, because 4, 8, 16, 20 milligrams, these are doses that are fantastic for mitochondrial support. And I always recommend starting at low doses, like at 4 or 8 milligrams, and increasing the dose over 3 to 5 days until you find that sweet spot, rather than starting off and like bludgeoning yourself with 50 or 70 or 100 milligrams of methylene blue, which may cause more stress on the system too, because at these higher doses, you're getting more of an anti-infective dose as well. And the anti-infective dose is good. I use it that way, but it also increases the amount of stress on the system, because the way it works as an anti-infective is by increasing hydrogen peroxide production in the cells. Our cells make hydrogen peroxide naturally. They do this to kill infection, to kill off cells that they don't want, kill cancer cells as well. But too much hydrogen peroxide, when the body's not ready for that, can be very stressful for the system as well. And so if people have a bad effect of methylene blue, it's often because it's contaminated, number one, or number two, they're taking too high of a dose of it initially that causes too much of a toxicity from like an oxidative load perspective.
So much to unpack there. What's your protocol for yourself personally?
It obviously depends, right? It depends on where things are and what I'm doing. So for example, I'm relatively health optimized at this point in my life because I've been doing this for a while. I take methylene blue maybe 2-3 days a week, low doses when I'm going to have a longer, more impact day. Like today I'm recording multiple podcasts and doing multiple things. It's my kid's first day at school today. And so like, I knew today was going to be a big day. So I took more methylene blue. Today I took 8 milligrams of methylene blue this morning. Typically my dose on like a regular day would be about 4 milligrams, maybe. And sometimes I'll take it twice daily if it's going to be a bigger day, but I don't take it every day typically. But if I have something more specific, like I'm going on an airplane, then we have a whole protocol that we've developed for travel to improve and support mitochondrial function. So I'll take more than that. I might take 8 to 16 milligrams twice daily, for a couple of days while I'm traveling, or maybe more. If, for example, another example here is this one you'll be understanding of. About 2.5 weeks ago, I partially tore my calf, which has been great. And that was not fun. I was playing soccer with my daughter and, snap. Thankfully it wasn't a full tear, but that's a pretty significant injury, right? And so as a result of that, I was taking 50 milligrams a day of methylene blue for about 3 to 5 days. And then I ramped it down from there.
And what benefit would you expect to see with that?
It's an anti-inflammatory benefit, really. And it's also mitochondrial support. So when you have like a significant injury like that, like you get a systemic inflammatory response, right? Sure. Like you want to have an inflammatory response in the muscle because that's how it starts healing, right? But you have to worry about the systemic inflammatory response because that's the response that's going to give you a leaky gut and a leaky brain and fuck up your cells and everything else. And so this is what happens. Like, and this is very, very common actually for people that are listening. You have if you have a traumatic hospitalization, you have a surgery, like all of a sudden, or you had actually a really good example is COVID, like a COVID infection. Like you had COVID, then all of a sudden now you have like Lyme reactivation and mold, and you have like a leaky gut and you have EBV or something. Like that's because you had this systemic inflammatory response. And so what methylene blue can do is actually quelch that systemic inflammatory response, along with other things. Of course, it wasn't the only thing I was doing. I got back in the hyperbaric chamber. I was taking high-dose glutamine, on peptides, and all the other kinds. But like in essence, to support mitochondria at a higher level with more stress, that's why I used the higher doses. But so my dosing will depend, right? But on average, it's about 4 milligrams once, twice daily, 2 or 3 days a week, and then it'll be more when I travel, and then more if there's a significant stress like I had a couple weeks ago.
I've heard some rumblings around genetic variability in the utility of methylene blue. Have you looked at that at all?
Well, I would say here is that when you're increasing energy capacity, you are thinking about the requirements that they're going to need to make energy. And so if you are somebody that needs more B vitamin support, which is many of us, you may need to do that to feel the optimal effects of taking methylene blue. And so what I often have people do is I leverage the biology in a way that enhances the capacity for methylene blue to make more energy effectively. So your macros, right? Like, what are you doing there? Are you eating shit or are you eating good stuff, right? And like, what does that mean exactly? That's obviously going to be different depending on the person, but obviously getting enough protein and getting enough fat, for example, but especially enough protein, for example. But the macronutrients are not as important initially as the micronutrients, because the micros, like your B vitamins especially, and minerals, are the ones that I almost always will supplement with when people are taking methylene blue for energy. Because as you rev up energy metabolism, you need more of those cofactors and micronutrients to help you. The other piece of the puzzle is that methylene blue does work as a monoamine oxidase inhibitor, which means that it increases serotonin, dopamine, and norepinephrine. Okay, so if you have slow genes, like your COMT gene, for example, that you slowly degrade norepinephrine, you might feel more wired with lower doses of methylene blue because it's increasing norepinephrine. So you have to be aware of that. So that's why I always start off low doses, almost always, unless it's an acute issue with the methylene blue. Then I titrate the dose over time until I find the one that works better. And we've been playing around with it during exercise as well, because there's some evidence, at least anecdotally, that with methylene blue on board, you reach your lactate threshold later. They've actually done these studies in dogs, where if you have methylene blue on board, you can reach your lactate threshold later, so you can actually do more work before you reach that threshold where you have to stop. And so, and there's sort of correspondingly to that, there seems to be a capacity for you to be able to recover at a higher heart rate compared to when you don't have methylene blue on board as well, because you're maintaining that capacity to make energy longer. So it's some interesting things there that these are not done in humans yet, like as far as like major studies, but some really interesting things that we know we're working on, internally at least, to see what we can find.
It sounds like there may be some utility in the realm of diabetes, or people who aren't who are super lactate dominant, like glycolytic. Is there any research there of, like getting people on methylene blue to help with
the mitochondrial function, right? And so if you can optimize and work on mitochondrial function, you're going to see an improvement. And it's interesting, right? Because metformin, as you know, it's a diabetic drug, but actually destroys complex 1 in the mitochondria. It's a mitochondrial dysfunction drug.
I'm very much against metformin for most people.
Yeah, me too. Actually, I think for people that are really obese and diabetic, I think it could be helpful in the short term.
Sure.
But I do think long term, I do get worried about its mitochondrial dysfunction piece. And so, but what they're trying to do with taking metformin is one of the goals is that you make new mitochondria that are working better, but you're still on metformin. So how does that work over the long term? I don't quite get it. But in essence, as a diabetic, insulin resistance is the number one cause of mitochondrial dysfunction in this country.
Oh, interesting. How often are you, I think I know the answer, but how often are you using hyperbarics? And do you have is there a benefit of taking methylene with the hyperbarics, just like sort of ongoing for general overall well-being and health? I know there's like protocols based on healing for specific illnesses and injuries, but as someone who I would say is probably one of the top experts in the world when it comes to hyperbarics, I'm curious if you still use it on an ongoing basis. Should I be using it on an ongoing basis, or in some regular cadence, or is it really just for acute healing and injuries?
I'm using a ton of methylene blue with hyperbaric protocols now because most of us have mitochondrial dysfunction. Most of us can use the support while they're leveraging an oxygen therapy, which is flooding the body with oxygen in a hyperbaric chamber. Some of that's carried on red blood cells, but most of it's liquid oxygen going to your cells, hopefully helping you make energy. But a lot of that's causing reactive oxygen species. And that's okay, because the idea of just like exercise is to cause a hormetic stress. But it's not okay if you don't have the capacity to create a neutralization response with antioxidants. And so I use a lot of methylene blue as my first line as I'm working with people that have mitochondrial dysfunction, any number of things, while I'm optimizing them long-term with mitochondrial support, vitamins, minerals, nutrients, lifestyle, diet, movement, et cetera. But I'm still using a lot of hyperbaric therapy as well, outside of just with methylene blue, of course. But what I think about with hyperbaric therapy is like the fork in the road, where it really is it an acute issue or is it a chronic issue or a long-term goal? If it's an acute issue, it's a fantastic tool to heal faster, more efficiently than the body can do it on its own, almost hands down. Like, I don't even care if it's a 1.3 chamber, like a mild chamber, versus a 2.0 chamber, 2.4. The deeper you go for like an acute injury, to some degree, like to a point to 2.4 at least, not any deeper than that, you're going to heal faster. Like, for example, with my calf, I did 5 hyperbaric sessions at 2.4 atmospheres for 90 minutes, because I wanted to get that stimulus as fast as I could. What it comes down to is that for that acute issue is that you're just kind of leveraging the body's systems to heal better. So I'll use a little bit of methylene blue. I use a lot of other supplementation to kind of help support that. But long-term, if you have like a long-term issue or a chronic issue or long-term goal, the real key is to optimize your metabolic function first, or at least get 60 to 70% of the way there before you start using using hyperbaric therapy as a longevity tool, because otherwise you're not going to see the benefits that you would otherwise see. And that's gotten me in trouble over the years, Ben, in the world of hyperbaric therapy, because I once had a lecture that was titled, "Please don't put them in the chamber," and I got disinvited from speaking.
Wow.
Because the goal was for me to say, look, if we can wait a 3-6 months in some of these patients, like we're going to see a huge additional benefit and long-term benefit if we could just get their foundational biology in order to a more significant degree. Not 100%, but even 60 or 70% can go a long way.
Everyone just wanted them to like get in the chamber as quick as possible.
If you have a facility that needs people in chambers,
Sure.
or a facility that needs people to exercise in it, whatever it might be, like you want people to exercise, you want people to use the chambers. Like it's just the nature of how business works. And I get that, but I've been, I guess, lucky in the sense that I don't work for a clinic. I work as a consultant for people that look to think about using hyperbaric therapy. So that's kind of how I...
Do you have a chamber in your house?
I do. Currently it's in pieces because we're doing a remodel, but I have a mild hyperbaric chamber that goes to 1.3 atmospheres. And like locally, 2 minutes away, I have a hyperbaric facility that that's right down the street that I work at sometimes, but mostly I consult with, and I can go to myself if I need to. So
a lot of my clients are very interested and curious about this. Like, if I put it in my house and I had it right there for myself every day, right beside my sauna and my cold plunge, how often would I do it if I wanted to live as long as I can and be healthy? Yeah.
So that's a very individual question, or very individual answer to the question, because it depends on kind of what exactly their goals are. If it's just longevity, then there are certain protocols for that. But then what else is going with their biology, whether technologies they're going to use, do they have any short-term goals, long-term goals? But in essence, there are longevity protocols that are pretty well laid out with hyperbaric therapy, typically at the 2 atmosphere pressure. And then how long you do them, how often you do them, it kind of depends on the cadence of exactly what you can do and what you want to do. And I'm being very circumspect here because it's very difficult to give like a prescribed way to do this. But in essence, what I have people do is I have them do a protocol where they do more intensive hyperbaric therapy for a period of time, maybe 2-4 months out of the year. And then the rest of the year, they're doing more intermittent, more maintenance therapy, going in maybe 2-3 days out of the week, and then at least taking 1 week off every month and not going into the chamber, and then varying the pressures, varying the times, varying how they're combining with other tools and technologies. And so there's a lot of sort of, let's call it intellectual property that I've developed over the years that I consult with people directly on. Yeah.
The short answer is hit me up on my website and pay for the consult. Totally. And I'm happy to do it.
Yeah. I mean, I don't mean to be circumspect too much, but I just try to, I don't like to give like a cookie cutter approach to this, but I worry people they're going to get in trouble because I've seen it. I've seen people people see me and they like, oh, doc, I've been using the chamber for 6 months straight. I haven't taken a day off. I'm like, no, please don't do that. Like, please don't do that. No, you need to take breaks. Like, it's very, very important. Yeah. So intensive and more maintenance, less intensive is kind of the nature of it over time.
Man, it's probably an ignorant question for me to have asked because it's like saying, hey, Ben, what workout should I do? You're like, well, I have no idea. Right. So it's true. So it's like, well, if you really want something that's customized, like it needs to be integrated with your goals and with your current lifestyle and your current challenges. And so we're saying the same thing. So I apologize for asking what I think now is an ignorant question.
I want to give enough information for people to know that do not use the chamber every day. That's not good. It's important to use it more intensively at times and more intermittently at other times. And the rest, you can talk to me about.
Yeah, it makes sense. And so what I was sort of looking at is like, would it be better to do it for 10 minutes a day more frequently, or 2 hours once a week, or like, but it's all good. I get it, man. I think I hear your point around like, it completely depends. Everyone's physiology is so unique and the time of year is so unique. And yeah, I get it. So man, I appreciate that so much.
Yeah, it's really important to actually look at like biometrics and actually diagnostics and therapeutics around it. So you look at things like oxidative stress markers, inflammatory markers, aging clocks, and so all these kinds of things that I kind of, bring in depending on how, and that this also helps me understand how much or how little you should use it as well. So it's all this kind of very interesting navigation, as you can tell. But in the context for me, Ben, like as I mentioned, right, I'm a health optimization medicine practitioner at my foundation from a clinical practice perspective. And then on top of that is, what are the things that can help you right now while you're on the path to health optimization? So tools, technologies, methylene blue, GABAergic things. And then on top of that is the hyperbaric therapy, where hyperbaric therapy comes in typically 3 to 6 months later when somebody's relatively well optimized, and it gives you that longevity and that wellness aspect, recovery, performance, lots of really amazing things. But if you bring it in too early, you're not going to get the benefits and you might cause more stress in the system. So it's kind of like, that's kind of my arc, I guess I would say, for people.
Yeah, man. So one final question is, what are your non-negotiables? So I generally say like somewhere between 3 and 5. Like some people have an infinite number, but like what are the three that you're like, hey, I don't ever go without these things? Could be daily, could be weekly, whatever seems relevant to you.
So non-negotiables, I think, okay, there's so many different ones here that I'd like to chat about. I think personally, um, meditation and my infrared sauna, like those are the two things that I know every day that are going to help me get into a parasympathetic state. And it's not like, people think about meditation. I know you talk about it all the time as well, Ben, but I don't think this is like quieting your thoughts and sitting in a dark room and doing dark retreats and shit like that, right? You can do all that, like that's cool, but meditation for me, micro meditations, just 5 seconds to take a breath or 10 seconds to take 3 breaths, right? It doesn't have to be, I do like to have like dedicated time during the day when I do it, ideally in sunlight if I can, which I'll do after our podcast today. But meditation is like a non-negotiable. But I don't like people to think that meditation, it's sort of like awaking as you are doing things meditation. Like it's not always a closed eyes, sitting quietly kind of thing. So it's very much a perspective shift. Let's call it that. Right? So that's one of my non-negotiables. Almost every night I get into my infrared sauna as well, because that's the way I can really just kind of wind down. My days are long. My days are packed. I have 4 kids as well, Ben, and so like my days are long with work, and then things don't stop when work stops. Work really ever stops anymore. And this is something that Dr. Ted, who you know very well, the founder of Health Optimization Medicine, the founder of Transcriptions, our for-profit company, likes to say it's not a work-life balance, it's a work-life integration. And that's kind of what I've gravitated towards understanding that concept. And then I guess the other one, like non-negotiable, is spending time with my kids. I know that my youngest is 8. I know, and my oldest now is 14. So just started high school this year. I just dropped her off at high school first day today. Like I could tell
Did you shed a tear, man? I'm shedding a tear for you over here.
It was kind of like, it was like so crazy, like this, but
you remember high school. You're like, oh, I remember this for myself.
I remember it, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
I remember high school. I remember my first day of high school, right? And I don't remember much like anything. Like I remember my first day. And so spending time with them, knowing that I don't have a lot of time left with them, I feel like, and there's so much wisdom that I've received from them. Like, I don't think you know this, Ben, but like my first teacher, I wouldn't be here if I didn't have, like, she was my most challenging baby. Like she didn't stop crying for 6 months. And like, I didn't know what not being in control was until I had a baby that didn't stop crying. Right. And it was my first time that I had to fully fucking surrender to like, I don't have control of this, And so that was like, so I have a lot of gratitude for her for that, and she's the best sleeper in my house now by far, but I guess that would be my final thing is non-negotiable is spending time with the kids. I could be playing with them. It could just be cooking dinner. It just could be driving in the car and taking them to school, just having a conversation. So those are some non-negotiables for me at the moment.
Ladies and gents, that's a wrap for today. Dr. Scott, thank you so much for being here. So where can you tell our audience where to get Transcriptions, where to reach out to you personally if they want to work with you?
Ben, it's been great to be with you, man. Thank you for your time. This has been such a pleasure to reconnect. So Transcriptions is the company that makes Methylene Blue products, also makes things for anxiety, stress relief, sleep that are based on the GABAergic neurotransmitter system, sympathetic overload that we talked about before, things like Just Blue, Tro Plus Blue, Trocom, Trozy. Check it out at transcriptions.com. We have a cool form factor called a Troche, dissolvable lozenge, super easy to use, buckle, dissolving. It's awesome. And then we have our nonprofit called Home Hope. It's at it's called Health Optimization Medicine and Practice is the name. Homehope.org is the website. And you can look at me personally for my stuff at drscottsherr.com, DRSCOTTSHERR.com. You can find my consulting, Hyperbaric, Health Optimization, companies, and all those things. But yeah, and on Instagram at Dr. Scott Sherr, at Home Hope, and at Transcriptions as well. Oh, and my Hyperbaric company is called One Base Health. You can check it out at onebasehealth.com as well.
We'll link to that in the show notes and so much more over at muscleintelligence.com/podcast. Scott, you're the man. Appreciate you, man. See you soon. And that's a wrap, ladies and gents. Thank you very much for joining me today on the Muscle Intelligence Podcast. I hopefully you enjoyed my conversation with Dr. Scott. As you can hear, a wealth of information, lots of stuff being thrown around. Scott is a big advocate of methylene blue for mitochondrial function, but I love the fact that he's willing to give us some insight into who it's for, who it's not for, some of the massive mistakes some of these people out there are making. There's definitely some people out there kind of making fools of themselves when it comes to methylene blue. So don't fall into the trap of misinformation. Scott is probably the number one resource in the world, at least for my research on methylene blue and mitochondrial optimization, certainly top there as well. So if you're somebody who wants to explore methylene blue, and again, I don't know that I'm an advocate. I've, to be honest, still never used it, but it may be worth looking at. It may be worth doing your own research. If you're going to try it, start low. Start with a nice low dose, just like Scott recommends. I think some people are overdosing this stuff. And when I do get an opportunity to try methylene blue, I will give you my feedback. My plan will be to do a 14-day trial, do a little personal self-experiment, and see if I like it, see what happens to me. And again, just because I like it or don't like it doesn't mean it will or won't work for you. But ladies and gents, if you did find this podcast valuable, I will be back soon with another incredible podcast. We have a solo cast or an interview podcast coming out every single week on Monday. If you want to be updated, head over to muscleintelligence.com and subscribe. You can go to muscleintelligence.com/newsletter. Subscribe to the newsletter. We will notify you of this podcast and my incredible Chief of Performance newsletter that comes out every Friday, which really is ultimately on the mission of helping you unlock the greatest version of yourself, whatever that mission is for you. My mission is to help you get there faster, more effectively, and being the best version of yourself on the way. If this podcast was valuable for you, I would love it if you shared it with at least one person or all the people that you know that would find value in this podcast. This podcast grows because of your shares, because of your comments and likes. So ladies and gents, if you're finding value in it, I would really appreciate to hear from you. Have an amazing day and live your greatest life in a body that you absolutely love. If you're someone who's interested in joining us in the Muscle Intelligence community as one of our coaching clients, you can head over to muscleintelligence.com/apply. That's APPLY. And join the wait list there, because we open up about once a month with a small number of people who are a great fit and ultimately who are ready now to be the best version of themselves moving into 2026 and beyond.